So join me for story time. The story of Benito Mussolini, credited with being the father of fascism. He took the worst of Stalinism and communism and the very worst parts of socialism and some other ugly isms and stirred them all in under a dictatorship. Should be noted he rose to power while he was placed there by a powerful what's the word I'm looking for? Industrialist. A fellow who owned Fiat cars. He kind of placed Benito there because Benito really wasn't the sharpest of cats when it comes right down to it. He wasn't bad on fiery orientation. B plus, Not quite in Adolf's league, but he wasn't bad at that. He did make the trains run on time in Italy. That's because they were terribly antiquated, and he poured government money into his buddy at Fiat who made new trains. Well, we've all seen that before anyways. So let's move along. Along comes Adolf. And we know what he was up to in Europe, right? And Benito, well, I should step back one step before the introduction with Adolf. Benito thought he needed a grandiose title, so he named himself El Duce, would that be how you say it in Italian? The Duke. He had no royal lineage, he was no duke, but he thought it was a cool handle, so he liked it. So anyways, Benny there, the Duke, he was a big fan of Hitler. He went rushing over to Berlin, and Hitler thought he was a doughhead and a goof, But Goring kicked him under the table there, He's an out, Give him some schnapps and a couple of Fräuleins there and some Wiener Schnitzel and send him back home with a hangover. So Hitler just, it's been many a story about what Hitler said about this doughhead from Italy, right? So anyways, at one point, Benny Boy thought it would be a great thing. He'd join Hitler in the cause, Said, hey, I'm going to commit my country to your cause, Adolf. And Adolf said, huh? And again, Goring kicked him under the table and said, hey, it'll keep the British busy down there in the Mediterranean and the desert warfare with Rommel, the desert fox in North Africa and all that business. So yeah, Benny declared war on the Allied forces. I don't think a lot of the populace was into that, but a lot of troops got shipped down to Africa. And it's kind of interesting, the first naval battle. The noble Italian Navy went out. I think they had like 9 antiquated boats that were antiquated in the First World War. They're still shoveling coal in the boilers. A couple of garbage scows, and trying to keep up desperately was an old fishing trawler. And I think like 2 British frigates had target practice, and in the morning the Italian Navy was no more. The Air Force did better. They had some good pilots, and they had some good planes too. All going back to Fiat and Friends and the taxpayers' money. That whole industrial thing was in northern Italy. So for a while, they gave the British RAF a tough go. The Air Force. The British were, delegated to send in some older second-hand stuff down there, and they were a little outclassed by the Italian aeronautical hardware. But the Italians, unlike Hitler, hadn't been training and practicing for years, so they ran out of pilots, skilled, trained, experienced pilots pretty quick. So then it kind of turned into a ground thing. Now, I know I'm really condensing a lot of stuff and sort of like fractured fairy tales. Remember that from childhood, that cartoon? But it's not unrealistic either. So when it came to ground fighting, because, I should say, Fiat and Friends were making gobs of money shipping stuff to Adolf for his war machine. The rich do get richer. And So that was working well. Well, they wanted to get in, the Allies, and stop that, right? So doing some ground fighting in the Southern Alps and stuff there, the Italians developed an undeserved um, reputation for being cowards, because often the British would, peek over the mountain there and see what's going on, and there'd be a platoon or a battalion of Italians who'd been conscripted. They just had their rifles piled up in piles with white flags tied to them and were waiting for the British to come and bring them a cup of tea, They didn't want to fight for Adolf. So, I don't know if it was ironic or not, or planned, but the Italians, when they were taking POWs, were shipped mostly to POW camps in the northern plains states in America, and the German POWs were sent down to Texas and New Mexico, Albuquerque. You know what I mean? They shipped the warm people to the cold and the cold to the warm. I don't know if that was intentional, but just thought I'd throw it in there. So anyways, when things were going bad, and it happened just 2 days before Hitler supposedly offed himself. Well, I think he drank poison or something. I don't know. Some controversy over that. Well, you step back a little. The German had to come in, forces had to come in and occupy northern Italy to protect Fiat and friends. And southern Italy had fallen, and there were partisans going on, and the country was in disarray. Benny Boy finally clued in it wasn't going to go well for him if he hung around, so he fled. He was trying to get to Switzerland, and then figured he'd shelter with he thought of as buddy Hitler, not realizing Hitler was 2 days away from his own. So anyways, Benny fled with his very young mistress and a stolen, I think, Lieutenant Army uniform, where now the story, everybody gets a little, nobody quite agrees what happens, but at or before the Swiss border, he was spied. I don't think taking his high-profile mistress with him was good thinking. Just made him all the more recognizable. Well, anyways, whoever caught him, whoever it was, nobody quite agrees, they just shot him on sight. That was that, right? And they were shipping him back to Rome, but his body, that is, and the mistresses, I believe, although nobody really wants to kind of talk about that too much, understandably. Anyways, he didn't make it to Rome. In Milan, they hung him from the girders in the town square and left him there for the carrion birds to pick to pieces. And it's rumored, well, the history usually says he was hung upside down. So one would be led to believe he was hung by his heels. Well, he wasn't hung by his heels or his head. So I won't go into the gory details of what they did hang him by. Yeah. So, hence is a Mussolini-style ending. Couldn't have happened to a nicer fella, I think an awful lot of Italians thought.